Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mixed Martial Arts. My name, as per usual, is Austin Shaper, and this is a show where we explore the topics of UAP, UFC, and World War III. What's going on, my fellow Martians? Today's going to be a UFC episode. I apologize if I look like the Walking Dead zombies right now. It is like 8 something in the morning. I always try to record these things early, especially on Sunday mornings. I'm extra tired because I stay up late to watch the fights on Saturday and then still wake up at like 7 o'clock, so deal with it. Moving on to last night's card, it was actually pretty interesting. I originally wasn't expecting to be too excited to record this episode because I thought it was a kind of a weak card. For it being a fight night, you guys know it was like the Mexican Independence Day, so they did the fight card in Mexico. And for a fight night, it was a really good card. The lineup was like, I only ended up watching the last 3 fights, which I will cover those last 3 on the main card. But I wasn't really like overly thrilled to do an episode on it, and I thought maybe I just won't do one. I only try to cover the fights that I'm like actually genuinely excited about doing. I don't want to just like cover it to cover it. But it ended up being definitely worth covering, especially because there was a little bit of controversy in the last fight with Valentina Shevchenko and Alexa Grasso coming in to defend her belt. This is their rematch, and I guess let's just start at the top of the card. Very interesting result. It ends up being, I think it was a split draw, and Alexa Grasso retains her belt because in this situation, if it's a draw, the champion doesn't lose their belt. So what are your guys' thoughts on this one? I have a few thoughts that may be a bit controversial, maybe not in the consensus opinion, because I was listening to the broadcast with Dominic Cruz and Daniel Cormier. And first of all, let's talk about the fight. It was a really good fight. I kind of figured it was going to be a really good fight because the first fight was so good and so competitive. And even though Shevchenko got submitted in that first fight, it was neck and neck the entire time up until it was finished. Now, in this fight, it was a very similar story. I thought Valentina Shevchenko came out with a great game plan. She definitely learned her lessons that needed to be learned from the previous fight with Alexa. And, she was just fighting really, really well. I mean, just the jab was on point. It seemed like it was one of those circumstances where Alexa Grasso had the power, and when she would land, I mean, she knocked down Shevchenko in, the second round? And Shevchenko responded immediately. It wasn't like she was almost gone or anything like that, but she did get knocked down pretty badly in I think the second round, and then bounced back. And Shevchenko had the takedowns. Alexa had the power. Shevchenko had the. She just had a great game plan, just like so sharp. The technique is always on point. I figured this was going to be a tough fight for Alexa, and I expected that there was a good chance that this could go to a trilogy, and it looks like it's probably going to go to a trilogy. But the fact that it's a draw, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Because I had it 2-2 going into the 5th round. So in the broadcast, I suppose, did as well, because Dominic Cruz said as much. He said whoever takes this 5th round is going to win this fight. That's how I saw it as well, and it was a very close fight. Now, in this 5th round, this is where it gets a little dicey with the result. So the reason why it ended up being a draw is because just one judge out of the 3 scored a 10-8 for Alexa Grasso in the 5th round. That is what made it a draw, and Valentina was pretty pissed, and she said, they did that because it's Mexican Independence Day and we're in Mexico, and, and I suppose I should mention this point as well. If that judge had scored it a 10-9, then Valentina, if he had scored it a 10-9 for Alexa Grasso, Valentina still would have won the fight. That's where it gets weird for me. And DC said something that I usually think DC makes great points, and this is like nothing like egregious or anything, but I thought it was worth addressing. He said that, we deserve to have a winner. These fighters deserve to have a winner, because they put so much on the line. And that 10-8 is what made it a draw. Now, as we just stated, it was 2-2 going into the 5th round. So whoever won that 5th round, in my head, and probably the majority, I mean, we saw, they pull up the Twitter reactions when a fight, is going on in the bottom left corner of the screen. A lot of people had it 2-2 going into the 5th round as well. It's pretty freaking obvious that Alexa Grasso won that 5th round, right? I mean, I don't know how you could think she didn't. She was very on point for the first half of the round. Definitely she was. Her jab was landing, and it kind of looked like she was pulling away. I don't dispute that one bit. I thought like, oh shit, okay, if Alexa doesn't pull something out the hat here and turn this round around, she's going to lose this fight. That was my thought because Valentina just looked sharp. Like I said, jab was on point, and she was just kind of taking over with the activity. And according to the broadcast, she was extremely accurate in her strikes. I forget the percentage, but it was like over 50% of her strikes were landing. So she was very accurate, very sharp. Technique was on point. Now, at about halfway, I think there was maybe 2 minutes, perhaps a little bit more, Alexa turned it on her. I forget how she got the takedown. I forget what exchange happened. It was a bit of a whirlwind of a fight, but suffice it to say, Alexa dominated the last 2.5 minutes of the fight. Maybe 2 minutes, yeah, dominated it. Was ground and pounding Valentina, going for the submission attempt. It looked several times like Valentina might be near getting stopped. Started bleeding out the nose, I think. And I don't know how close Valentina was to being out, but it definitely was. If we're talking who was more dominant in the fifth round, while Valentina, in my opinion, was winning the majority of the round up until that point, when the tide turned, it turned bad. Valentina was on the ground defending. There was a lot of unanswered strikes coming from Alexa Grasso. She went for the submission attempt. Seemed like she almost got it, and they ended the fight on the ground with Alexa, ground and pounding her and going for the submission. So dominant round for Alexa Grasso. So let's just think. If it's 2-2 going into the fifth and Alexa wins the fifth, it, in my opinion, would be that Alexa would win the fight. Now, I am 100% okay with the draw, and here's the reason why. I thought it was such a close fight, and for me, it was like a relief because for whatever reason, I suppose the reason is obvious, but the UFC and the judging never really gives draws, not often. It's like very rare. The last title fight I can think that happened was Moreno and Davison Figueiredo that ended in a draw. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So it doesn't happen very often, especially in championship fights. It just doesn't happen. They don't like the draw. But for me, as a fan, I love the draw because if it's a close fight and you can't really, in my opinion, I think if it wasn't going to be a draw, I would have been absolutely okay with Alexa Grasso retaining her belt because of what she did in that fifth round and it being 2-2 going into the fifth. Now, a draw, I'm 100% okay with because I thought it was such a close fight. And when there's not a clear winner, I always think it's a bit of a travesty when they kind of just, it's like they flip heads or tails and they give it to a fighter. And it happens all the time. I mean, if you guys watch the UFC as consistently as I do, time and time again, there's decisions where everybody's just scratching their head like, what? Either it was like they give it to the wrong person or there's like such a close fight that, as I mentioned, there's no clear winner to even give it to. So it's like they kind of just give it to somebody and then the narrative gets rewritten about how they won that fight when prior to the decision being read off, we all kind of thought it was, there was no clear winner. So for me, I know it's probably frustrating for the fighter, so I get that 100%. But I think a draw is a great thing. I think when there's no clear fighter, it's the wrong move to give it to somebody just to give it to somebody because the UFC wants resolution, the judging wants resolution. It's obviously probably not very popular with the crowd to be seeing draws often. So I understand the rationale, but in this fight, the logic of the 10-8, I didn't think it was a 10-8 round. I did not think that at all. While Alexa was very dominant in the last 2 minutes, again, as I mentioned, Valentina was not dominant, but she was pulling away definitely in the first half of the fifth round. So she was pulling away. I didn't see a 10-8, and it's interesting because, the point that they were hung up on with the broadcast and Valentina herself was that if that had not been scored a 10-8 for Alexa Grasso, then Valentina would have won the bout. That would have made me a little upset because I don't know how you could possibly give that round to Valentina, and had you give a 10-9 to Alexa Grasso and made it the fight go to Valentina, I don't know what rounds they scored for Valentina that, in my opinion, shouldn't have happened because, again, it was pretty clear in my mind that it was 2-2 going into the fifth. The broadcast said as much, and they're sitting right there cage side. So while I don't agree with the way we got to the draw, I don't agree with the 10-8 at all, I am 100% okay with the draw. I think it's the right move. And again, if it wasn't going to be a draw, I just don't think you could have given it to Valentina because of that fifth round. The fight was super close, and going into the fourth round, I did think it was up 2-1 Valentina, and DC said as much. He said this was the same way it went in the first round, 2-1 Valentina going into the fourth. But then Alexa Grasso she kind of is the perfect opponent for Valentina, right? I mean, just the perfect opponent. She seems to have the power advantage. She defends the submission attempts. While she does get taken down, she pops back up relatively quickly for the most part. And she stands there and trades in the pocket with Valentina. That's how she ended up knocking down Valentina in, I think, the second round. They were in an exchange, and they both countered each other, but Alexa's just had the power. So she's got the power advantage. She stands up against the takedown. She's not afraid to bring the fight to Valentina. So I love this rivalry, and I love that this is probably going to a trilogy. I think it's the right move, and I think it would have been the wrong move to give Valentina the belt. Notwithstanding the fact that she put up a great fight, absolutely, but just because it was 2-2 going into the fifth, Alexa takes the fifth. To me, that's easy math, and even though we got to that in an incorrect way because of the judging, as usual, that 10-8 is what made it be a draw, and that 10-8 was definitely not a correct move from that judge. End of the day, I do think a draw was probably the right decision because, again, I think Alexa edged the fifth round. So if you were asking me, I would have said either a draw, or if you were going to pick a winner, it had to be Alexa because she did edge that fifth round. It looked as if Valentina was winning the first half of it, and Alexa took the last half. But in that last half, it was extremely dominant, and she did get kind of close to finishing Valentina. Valentina was not answering shots. She had no way to get up off the ground. She was just kind of trying to survive, basically trying to survive the last minute or two of the round. So in my opinion, I'm okay with the draw here because the champion retains the belt. I would have given it to Alexa Grasso. I like a draw. I don't like how we got to the draw. I think draws should happen way more often in the UFC. I think they don't happen for political reasons, like I said, for the fact that the fan base doesn't really, like I said, there's not much resolution. Kind of always sets up a rematch. So, that keeps the division, preoccupied for another, 6 months until the fight gets rescheduled and all that. So I can understand the rationale for no draw. I did believe that this was fine. And as I'm kind of talking about it, like I said, my opinion actually is kind of changing in real time because I love the draws. I think they're great when there's not a clear winner. But in my opinion, the clear winner was Alexa. And had that 10-8 round not happened, then Valentina would have won on the judges' scorecard. So kind of a very weird, interesting, controversial scenario. I'm open to hearing your guys' take on it. And as we got to the decision, it was the wrong way to arrive because of the 10-8. But, kind of props to that judge. He was kind of for the first time in a long time, a judge giving the wrong input, the wrong scoring ended up in the right result. So kind of what a weird predicament that is. And DC said, oh no, the fight deserves to have a winner. I disagree. If it's a close fight and there's not a clear winner, in my opinion, it was pretty clear that Alexa won. But if there, I also can fully admit that was a very, very, very competitive fight, and that's without looking at the stats. I'd have to take a look at that to be able to get back to you guys, like with the CompuStrike, whatever they call it, to see who possibly edged it, at least in that department of significant strikes landed, who was more active, who was more accurate, so on and so forth. I was fine with it. What a fight. Let's do the trilogy. I think Alexa Grasso has the recipe to beat Valentina, but then again, Valentina is a monster, and I knew she was going to do her homework. I did not think this was going to be like the Leon Kamaru rematch, where granted that was a trilogy, but the point stands that I didn't think this was going to be like how Kamaru kind of just got dominated throughout. Whereas I thought he was going to have a much better showing of himself, being able to watch the tape of how it went wrong in the previous fight. Valentina, I wasn't worried for one bit. I mean, she's clearly one of the best women's fighters of all time. That's not in dispute. So, what a fight. Now, let's move on to the co-main with Kevin Holland and Jack Della Maddalena. I'm just going to call him Jack because, these last names, it's like they're making it up to make it difficult for us because in any sport I've ever watched in my life, the names are so overly complex, it's absurd. And I guess it's just because these people are from all over the world, whereas if you watch American football, they're all Americans, like Smith and Jones and just easy names. The UFC names are just, I feel so bad for the broadcast team, dude. It gets so crazy, so we're just going to call him Jack. Now, I always want to be frank with you guys. I'm not an expert, not an authority on this, and I a little bit discounted Jack because I didn't see anything on his resume. I never watched his fights live before, and I knew he had a lot of hype, a lot of people, a lot of high praise, and that never usually comes without reason. When the broadcast team and when the experts on the podcast, like Luke Thomas and them, speak highly of a fighter, it's always for good reason. So I didn't doubt that they were praising him for the right reasons, but I simply didn't do my homework enough on him, and I looked at his resume, and I wasn't impressed with anybody he really beat. He beat Dan Roberts, which is a good victory, but other than that, no contenders, no one in the top, I think, even 15. Nothing to make me be like, okay, Kevin Holland needs to be really worried here. I thought Kevin Holland was going to use that range like he always does. He's dynamic on the feet. It seemed that the consensus was Jack was going to keep it on the feet, which is how it happened. And I was really thoroughly impressed with Jack. I was impressed with both of them. I thought Kevin Holland did great. I mean, he really was doing fine. He had good defense. He was using his range. He was backing up and not staying in the pocket too long. He was using the kicks. He was using the teeps. I mean, he was fighting good. Same old Kevin Holland, just fighting good, fighting, tricky. He's got a tricky style. And that ranginess is a problem to deal with. And Jack was having a little bit of problem getting close to him, but when he did get close and he landed, he had some vicious shots on Kevin Holland, some vicious techniques where he go from the body to the head, back to the body, back to the head. And I got to give my hats to Jack Della Maddalena because he's going to be a problem in this division. I could see he seemed 100% unfazed, and he seemed unfazed and just so content in the fight. He didn't seem to be scared from anything or intimidated by the moment. This was his first, I think, fight in the top 10. And he seemed absolutely unfazed by anything Kevin Holland brought to the table, even when he got landed on, even when he'd be kicked, even when he would miss because Kevin Holland would be backing up. It's like he was just dead-eyed and he would just go again, try again, and eventually he would land and have some success. And yeah, I mean, the composure, just like championship level composure, honestly. Like, I was very impressed, and it's nice to see when the hype train is real for somebody. And that's not to say that I thought it was going to be fake, but I just thought he was largely untested. I saw his highlights and all that stuff, but I wasn't that impressed because I'm like, okay, let's see you do it against a contender. I thought this was a big step up in competition. Thought it was a very competitive, close fight. Didn't think that Kevin got dominated by any means, but I did absolutely think Jack won that fight, and I'm excited to see Jack move up in this division. He's got an interesting style. Some of his highlights led me to believe he might be a little sloppy. He trades in the pocket and gets cracked, but he didn't really do that too much in this fight. He did have a few problems getting through the range of Kevin, but that's natural. That's to be expected. How are you going to get past the dude who's much taller with long legs, long arms? It's going to take you risking. It's going to take you putting some risk out and having to close the gap, closing the distance, maybe eat some shots on the way in, and he did just a fantastic job. So I am excited. I believe the hype now. Props to him. Man, his nose is smashed. I feel like if you have a smashed nose going into your fights, it gives you an advantage because your nose can't get smashed, It's like he got hit several times flush, and it's like no scratches, no bleeding, no bruising, because his face is already like borderline two-dimensional. So what a fight. Last one we'll talk about before I hop off of here is the Rosas Jr. fight. Now, this is not really that interesting a fight to me. It only lasted 1 minute, and he got the knockout over, God, I don't even know his opponent's name. And from what Luke Thomas was saying, that this was a tailor-made matchup for Rosas Jr., who was coming off of a pretty horrible loss. And keep in mind, this dude's 18, so a lot of the hype around him is justified no matter what because he's an 18-year-old fighting in the UFC already. So you got to be a fan regardless. But it did seem like if he lost this one, he's probably going to get cut, sent back down to the regional circuit or something until he got older and just kind of grew up, which wouldn't have been the worst thing. Again, he's only 18. You give him 2 years to train, be on the regional scene, or go back to the Contender Series and come up, do the thing again. And, he's only 21, 22 if that happened to him. But that's not how it happened. He lands a flush knockout within the first minute of the first round. Now, I didn't think it was anything to write home about as far as technique. It was literally just a crazy haymaker. They both threw at the same time, and his haymaker landed, and then he got on top of his opponent and finished it with ground and pound. So impressive. What can I say? Impressive. He's 18 years old, getting victory in the UFC, man, and now he's going to stick around. He's going to keep his contract. He ain't getting booted out, and it was a dominant performance. But at the end of the day, did we learn anything about him? Not really. We just learned that, he can land a strike like every UFC fighter can, and there was no, again, his guard was down when he threw it, so like he was totally open to a counter shot. So like this could have gone the opposite way. He was just throwing full power and balls to the walls. And so I don't think we learned anything about like his improvement of his technique on the feet or anything like that. Thought it was just a great flush strike that landed, and that's all she wrote. So I'm excited, I suppose, to see more from him. I still think he's largely untested, though the hype is definitely warranted, simply because of how young he is. He came out and said he wants to be the youngest champion in the world. It's possible. We'll have to see, man. We'll have to see. It's just largely untested. We'd have to see him go up, and it's going to take some time to develop him. I don't want them to rush him like the Darren Till experiment. Huge fan of Darren Till, but it was kind of sad to see what happened with his career, right, man? Once he got to Tyron Woodley, he barely edged past Wonder Boy, and then they gave him the title shot against Woodley. Woodley absolutely smashed him into oblivion, and his career was never the same after that. It was up and down until he got released from injuries. And is he ever going to make it back to the UFC? Probably not. I hope I'm wrong, but it seems like probably not. So I would not want to see them do that with Rosas Jr. Nice and slow. The Sean O'Malley approach is probably the right one here. Just another opponent, nobody that's huge step up in competition, but that is competitive. No big names yet, nothing like that, and we'll see where he goes. So overall, pretty good night of fights. I was excited. I finished the Valentina fight. I watched that whole one in the morning. The other two I watched last night before going to bed, but it was like midnight or something when I turned it off. So I can't stay up too late for these fights, or it like ruins my next day, and I got no energy. And I work on Sundays, so got to have the energy. If you guys enjoyed this type of content, keep in mind I do other topics other than just UFC. I do UFO news, and I do World War III/geopolitical stuff as that is developing. And if you appreciate any of those type of content, you like this video, just do me a solid and click subscribe on the channel. I'm attempting to get to 1,000 subscribers so that I can start to go live and do live chats with you guys. So that's something free, simple, and easy that takes 1 moment that you could do for me. Just click subscribe. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning in. I really enjoy doing this. If you guys are listening to the podcast only, the audio format on like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, what's the other one called? Podcast Addict, which I've never been on, but apparently my podcast is on there. Go ahead and click follow and leave me a 5-star review. And lastly, if you guys would like to be a part of the conversation daily with me and others, we got a little Discord group called Mixed Martial Arts, little private group, but you can click the link in the description to this video and join it. We have 3 subgroups: UFO, UAP news, World War III stuff, and obviously UFC stuff. So we share news, breaking headlines, ask questions, share our experiences, our interest in these topics, and kind of just build connections with people from all over the place who share these same interests. It's okay if maybe only like 1 out of the 3 subjects, or maybe even 2. Best case scenario, there's a few of you out there who do love all 3 like myself, and then you're definitely tailor-made for this group. So we're going to be doing some fun things as the group grows, like playing games together and watching the fights and doing little what do you call those shows on like Twitter, like Spaces type shows where you guys can talk as well. It's not, and I'll host it. It's not just me doing a monologue. So we've got a lot of things planned as the group grows. Go ahead and go ahead and join that if it sounds interesting to you guys. I'll be back the next day or 2 with another episode. I think probably geopolitical stuff, because there's quite a few things heating up on the front with China, and obviously the Russia-Ukraine war is trudging along as per usual. All right, y'all, it's time for me to start my day. I've got a lot going on, got a busy day ahead of me. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We'll be back shortly. Take it easy, Martians. Hope you have a good one.